Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a pretty fundamental exploration. We're looking at conceptual frameworks of autonomy and non-autonomy.
Right.
Think of this as your essential guide, maybe a shortcut, to understanding some truly deep ideas that shape not just our world, but really how we experience it.
That's a great way to put it. This topic is, well, it's incredibly important because it underpins so much, doesn't it? Our individual lives, the very structures of society.
Yeah.
It helps us define things like freedom, control, and ultimately, how we construct or perceive our reality.
Okay.
And you'll find these ideas rooted in some foundational principles, things like common sense realism, moral philosophy, particularly Scottish and American traditions, and what shaped early American liberalism.
So let's really dig into this. We're examining the frameworks that dictate how individuals and groups, too, see themselves as self-governing and how they perceive reality itself.
Mm-hmm.
And at the heart of it, you're saying we're drawing a contrast between two major approaches, conceptualism and realism.
Yes, exactly. Conceptualism, at its core, is the idea that reality is largely a product of human minds. Our concepts, our ideologies, even our collective agreements.
So if we think it, it's real. Or if enough of us agree.
In a way, yes. If we think it or collectively agree on it, it gains a form of reality for us. Consider a universal idea like justice.
Okay.
For a conceptualist, justice isn't some independent thing out there. It's something we, as humans, have defined and shaped through our thoughts, our societal constructs.
Right. We built the concept.
We built it.
Okay.
And then on the other side of that coin, you have realism.
Okay.
This perspective posits that reality exists independently of our minds, completely separate.
So we don't create it.
No, we discover it.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about, say, timeless truths, maybe divinely ordered ones, or empirically accessible facts understood through reason or common sense.
Like common sense realism.
Exactly that. The point is, there's an objective truth out there. We aren't its creators. We are participants in it, trying to understand what's already real.
We're trying to map it, not draw it from scratch.
Precisely. And what's fascinating then is looking at how individuals actually govern themselves within these different worldviews. And we've identified sort of 4 key types of autonomy, each showing a different relationship with that reality.
Okay, let's break those down. Where do we start?
Let's start with the most individualistic one.
Radical autonomy. Sounds intense.
It is. It's pure conceptualism in action. It's about absolute self-determination, a complete rejection of any external authorities or objective truths.
So my truth is the only truth.
Essentially, yes. For someone embracing this, reality is entirely subjective, shaped solely by their individual perception and reason. Think of someone living completely off-grid, right? Forging their own reality, their own rules, believing only what they themselves decide is true.
Okay, I can picture that. What's next?
Then we move to conceptualist autonomy. Still within the conceptualist realm, but it's, let's say, more refined. Well, self-governance here comes from creating or adopting specific intellectual frameworks. Reality is still shaped by human concepts, but there's a deliberate, creative, intellectual engagement.
So less raw perception, more structured thinking.
Exactly. Think of a philosopher developing an entirely new ethical theory. They're not claiming to discover some universal moral law out there.
Right.
They're proposing a groundbreaking human way to redefine morality for a society. It's a construct, but a sophisticated one.
Okay, that makes sense. So those are the conceptualist versions of autonomy.
Yeah.
Now, shifting into the realist camp.
Yes. Here we find ordered autonomy. This is about self-governance, but within structured societal frameworks. Things like democratic laws may be inspired by that American liberalism tradition we mentioned.
Okay.
But crucially, these frameworks always aim to align with an objective reality, understood through reason or common sense.
So like a legislator.
Perfect example. A legislator drafting laws not just based on what's popular, but on what they believe are objectively true, universal principles of justice. They're participating in an existing reality, trying to reflect it in law, not inventing it whole cloth.
Oh, got it. Participating, not creating. And the last one for autonomy.
And finally, we have traditionalist autonomy, also firmly in the realist camp.
What?
Here, self-governance is found through fidelity to established traditional norms, think religious doctrines, for example.
So following the established path.
Yes, but with the belief that this path reflects something real, Reality is still seen as objective and pre-existing, but it's accessed and understood through these long-standing truths. They're seen as reflecting a deeper, timeless reality.
Like a religious leader upholding sacred texts.
Exactly. Upholding them and living other timeless teachings, believing them to be objectively true, guiding principles passed down because they reflect that deeper reality.
Okay, so those are the 4 ways people can be self-governing within these different views of reality. But what happens when that self-governance is limited or, just absent?
Right. Let's flip the coin now and explore non-autonomy, where reality is often shaped by frameworks imposed from the outside.
Where do we start there? Still, conceptualism versus realism.
We primarily see non-autonomy arising within conceptualist frameworks or as a general state. On the conceptualist side, there's conceptualist non-autonomy. And this actually comes in 2 main flavors.
Okay.
First, there's what we might call a progressive version. This often involves alignment with collective ideologies. Think of a social justice movement, perhaps.
Right.
Here, reality is sort of collaboratively constructed by the group, and individual agency is, well, somewhat limited by deference to the group's shared norms, its specific concepts, its language.
So an activist adopting the movement's definitions and priorities.
Exactly. Promoting equity within that movement using its precise language. The framework comes from the collective.
Okay. And the other flavor?
The other side is what we've termed Conceptualist Non-Autonomy, Traditionalist. Now, this can sound a bit like Traditionalist Autonomy, but it's crucially different.
How's that?
Here, it's about adopting traditional concepts, which are still seen as human-made ideas within this model, but with very limited individual agency. Why? Because of an uncritical deference to an authority figure or just the tradition itself.
So it's not about believing the tradition reflects objective truth.
Not necessarily, or at least that's not the focus.
It's more like, this is what the book says, or this is what the leader says, full stop.
Precisely. Less personal discernment of objective truth, more acceptance of the established construct as the construct. That's what we do, or that's what the authority dictates. There isn't that same grounding in discovered objective reality you see in traditionalist autonomy.
Okay, that's a subtle but important difference. And the most extreme end?
That would be general non-autonomy. This signifies a profound lack of self-governance. Reality is shaped entirely by imposed frameworks, often coming from an authoritarian state.
Just pure compliance.
Passive compliance, yes. Reality is externally controlled. A citizen in a totalitarian regime who simply accepts state propaganda without any question. That's the starkest example.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of ground covered. So let's pull back a bit.
Yeah.
What does this all mean for how these different frameworks actually, build or perceive reality?
Right.
How do they operate fundamentally?
Good question. For the conceptualists, that's radical conceptualists, and both types of conceptualist non-autonomy reality is very much a human product.
Made by us.
Made by us. In radical autonomy, it's the individual's personal creation. With conceptualist autonomy, it's formed through these new intellectual frameworks we talked about.
Okay.
And for conceptualist non-autonomy, whether it's driven by collective ideologies or that unquestioning deference to tradition as construct, reality is still built from shared human ideas or adopted concepts. The individual is, well, involved, but maybe not always driving.
A co-creator, but with different levels of input.
Exactly. The amount of input varies dramatically.
And that's a striking contrast when you look back at the realist frameworks, ordered and traditionalist autonomy.
Huge contrast. Here, the individual isn't creating reality. They're engaging with a reality that already exists, independent of human thought.
They're participants.
Participants. In ordered autonomy, that engagement happens through societal structures, laws, institutions that ideally align with those objective truths. Think of laws reflecting universal human rights.
Okay.
And in traditionalist autonomy, that objective reality is engaged with through traditions, religious practices, spiritual principles that are seen as reflecting timeless truths.
So in both realist cases, you're aligning yourself with something pre-existing.
Precisely. Through reason or faith or adherence to principles believed to be objectively real, you're a participant, maybe even a steward, but not the architect.
This brings us to a really critical point, I think. What happens when our perception of reality, or what we accept as authority, becomes untethered, when there's no independent anchor?
Ah, yes. This is where we see serious problems like circularity and skepticism start to creep in, particularly with radical autonomy and any form of non-autonomy.
How so, with radical autonomy?
Well, if reality is purely subjective, like we said, then truth becomes simply whatever I decide it is. My perception is the ultimate judge, right? There's no external check.
So if I challenge you, you just say, well, that's my truth.
Exactly. There's no external independent validation possible. And this leads straight into a kind of circular reasoning. It's true because I perceive it to be true.
And I perceive it to be true because it's true for me.
Precisely. It's an appeal only to the self as the ultimate authority. There's no anchor outside of me for shared understanding.
And you're saying this isn't just a problem for the radical individualist. It affects the non-autonomy frameworks, too.
Absolutely. Look at Conceptualist Non-Autonomy. In that progressive version, truth becomes whatever the collective ideology says it is.
So if challenged, the answer is,
That's what the movement believed, therefore it's real. Or, in the traditionalist form of Conceptualist Non-Autonomy, it's even simpler. That's what the authority figure says, or that's what the tradition dictates, so it is true.
okay, so connecting this to the bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
both of those are basically appeals to a third party,
Mm-hmm.
like an expert class or a central committee or a specific leader or text.
Exactly. It's an appeal to some authority, but not necessarily to an objective, independently verifiable reality. The justification for belief isn't external evidence or, rigorous reason applied to observation.
It's just the pronouncement of the chosen authority.
It's the pronouncement. And the ultimate consequence of both these extremes, pure self-authority on one end or blind deference to a third party on the other, is this really corrosive skepticism.
How does that follow?
Well, think about it. If your truth is only valid for you, why should anyone else possibly believe it? There's no common ground. And if a collective's truth or an authority's truth is only valid because they say so, what happens when a different collective or a different authority comes along with a conflicting truth?
Everything becomes questionable.
Everything. It completely erodes the foundation for shared understanding, for objective inquiry, genuine dialogue, finding a consensual reality we can all operate within. It becomes incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible.
This discussion of circularity and skepticism, it really feeds into this idea of the slippery slope, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
It's fascinating how each framework seems to look at the others with caution, fearing this drift into stances they see as, well, problematic.
Yes, there's an inherent sense of vulnerability. Let's take ordered autonomy, for example. From that perspective, traditionalist autonomy can look like a potential slippery slope.
Towards what?
Towards conceptualist non-autonomy. The fear is that the deference to tradition stops being a reasoned engagement with objective truth accessed through tradition and becomes just uncritical acceptance of human constructs because they're traditional.
Okay. Blind deference.
Blind deference. Or even worse, potentially sliding into general non-autonomy. If those traditions start being coercively enforced without genuine individual assent based on perceived objective truth.
Right. And the traditionalist autonomist, looking back at ordered autonomy, what's their concern?
They look at ordered autonomy's reliance on human reason and evolving societal frameworks with significant caution.
Seeing it as unstable.
Potentially. They might see it sliding towards conceptualist autonomy, where society starts creating human-made realities instead of upholding objective ones found in tradition, or even further into radical autonomy, where individual reason throws out all established norms, including the traditional ones they hold dear.
So the realists see risks in each other, pointing towards conceptualism.
But now, look at the conceptualist frameworks themselves. They are generally seen as being on a much, much steeper, slippery slope.
Why steeper?
Because their foundations are inherently fluid. Take conceptualist autonomy. With its rejection of external constraints, it can quite easily drift into radical autonomy, pure subjectivism. And if individual agency gets reduced for some reason, maybe through group pressure or disillusionment, it can also slide easily into conceptualist non-autonomy. The lack of an external anchor makes these shifts more likely.
And what about conceptualist non-autonomy itself? The progressive and traditionalist versions?
Those are arguably at the highest risk of sliding into general non-autonomy.
Because agency is already limited.
Exactly. When individual agency is already compromised, when deference to an external authority, whether a collective or a specific leader text, is the norm, it's a remarkably short step to outright coercive imposition by external powers. The groundwork for submission, for accepting an imposed reality, is already laid.
So, to sum up those potential pitfalls,
Yeah.
conceptualist frameworks seem much more prone to drifting.
Demonstrably so. Drifting towards extreme subjectivity at one end or complete external control at the other. Realist autonomy, because it's grounded in trying to access an external, independent reality, is inherently more stable.
It has an anchor.
It has an anchor. The real slippery slope we need to watch out for, based on this analysis, is deeply embedded in the nature of conceptualism itself.
Okay, here's where, for me, it gets really interesting and maybe a bit unsettling. One of the biggest factors making these slopes slippery is something you call rhetorical overlap.
Yes, this is a powerful and I think quite insidious trap.
What is it exactly?
It's when conceptualism uses language, uses terms that sound almost identical to the terms used by realism.
Like what?
Conceptualists will talk about universals or objective reality or truth, but for them, these are ultimately just widely shared human constructs, ideas we've collectively agreed upon or built.
Okay.
But for realists, those same terms, universals, objective reality, truth, refer to genuinely independent pre-existing realities or principles, things outside the human mind.
And because the words are the same.
Massive confusion. It creates profound societal disorientation because people think they're talking about the same thing when their fundamental assumptions about what those words mean are completely different.
What's the impact of that confusion, say, on ordered autonomy?
Well, ordered autonomy tries to align with objective truth through reason and structures, but this rhetorical overlap makes it really difficult. It might inadvertently mistake purely. Conceptualist constructs popular ideas, ideological norms for genuine objective truths.
Because they're presented using the language of objective truth.
Exactly. It struggles to discern that these universals being discussed, maybe things like social justice or equity as defined by a specific group, might just be human-made constructs within a conceptualist framework rather than reflections of an independently existing reality. Spotting the difference becomes incredibly hard.
And you mentioned traditionalist autonomy is especially vulnerable here.
I think so, yes. Its focus on established truths and its natural deference to tradition can look deceptively similar on the surface to conceptualist non-autonomy's deference to collective or adopted concepts.
Because both involve following something established.
Right, but the basis is different. One aims for objective truth via tradition, the other accepts a traditional construct. This linguistic trap doesn't just confuse, it actively amplifies the slippery slope risk for traditionalists. They might believe they are upholding objective, timeless truths when they are actually, perhaps unknowingly, deferring to human-made conceptual frameworks dressed up in traditional language. They risk losing their connection to objective reality and their own autonomous agency without even realizing it, simply because the rhetoric sounds familiar.
Wow. And for the conceptualist frameworks themselves, does this overlap affect them?
Oh, absolutely. It just reinforces their inherent fluidity. It makes it easier for them to slide between different conceptual positions, maybe towards radical subjectivity, maybe towards non-autonomous deference, precisely because the concepts being used seem to be objective or universal, when fundamentally they're just shared human ideas.
So the shared language masks the underlying differences and dangers.
Perfectly put. This rhetorical overlap is a huge, often silent driver of these problematic shifts. It makes having a clear, grounded conversation about reality incredibly challenging.
Okay, so let's try to ground this a bit more. Finally, let's pull back and think about how the individual actually interacts with the state within each of these frameworks. That dynamic must look quite different.
It looks very different. It tells us a lot about who holds the power to define reality in practice.
Okay, let's start with radical autonomy. Individual versus state.
Here, the individual is the sole arbiter of truth and right. So from this perspective, the state is fundamentally an illegitimate imposition, something to be rejected, ignored, or actively resisted.
So antagonistic or totally disengaged?
Yes.
What about conceptualist autonomy, the intellectual framework creator?
For them, the individual sees themselves as a co-creator of reality through ideas. The state, well, it can be a partner if it helps implement those intellectual ideals, or it can be an obstacle if it doesn't.
So engagement is selective, critical.
Very much so, often aimed at advocating for policy changes that reflect their preferred conceptual frameworks. Think tanks, maybe, or academic policy advisors.
Okay. Now, ordered autonomy.
Yeah.
The participant in objective reality via structure.
Right. Here, the individual is a participant. The state is seen as a legitimate partner if it aligns with objective truth and reason, but it's critiqued, challenged, engaged with democratically when it deviates.
So collaborative but watchful.
Exactly. Critical engagement within the system, aiming to keep it aligned with perceived objective principles.
And traditionalist autonomy, the steward of objective truth via tradition.
The individual here is primarily a steward of those established objective truths found in tradition. The state is an ally if it respects and upholds those traditions.
But a threat if it doesn't.
A profound threat if it disregards or undermines them. So engagement here is conditional. It often leads to active support for tradition-aligned laws or maybe fervent resistance against perceived state overreach into those traditional domains.
Okay, that covers the autonomous types. Now the non-autonomous side. Let's start with conceptualist non-autonomy. Progressive. Individual and state.
Here, the individual often contributes to a collective reality, usually within a movement. The state then becomes a primary vehicle, a tool for achieving the collective's ideological goals.
So the dynamic is advocacy, pushing the state.
Heavy advocacy, yes, or opposition if the state isn't aligned with the movement's constructed reality and goals.
And conceptualist non-autonomy, traditionalist, following established constructs authorities.
Here, the individual follows those established human-made constructs or specific authorities within a tradition, the state. It can either be seen as a necessary enforcer of these constructs, maintaining order based on them, or it can be a threat to them.
Leading to deference or resistance again.
Exactly, depending on whether the state supports or challenges the specific traditional constructs being followed.
And finally, general non-autonomy.
Here, the individual is simply passive, a recipient of an imposed reality. The state is the dominant defining authority.
So the dynamic is just
Submission. Fundamentally submission. There's no negotiation, no independent thought expected or permitted. The state defines everything.
right. Wow. Okay, we've covered a huge amount. So let's try to boil it down.
Yeah.
What are the really big implications here? What should you, our listener, really take away from this deep dive?
Well, I think there are a few crucial takeaways.
Sure.
Firstly, that fundamental difference between conceptualism and realism, it's absolutely critical. Conceptualism empowers individuals as co-creators, which can feel liberating, but it carries that inherent risk of skepticism and relativism. If everything is a construct, what anchors our shared understanding?
Right. And realism.
Realism grounds individuals in an objective reality. It's a powerful counter to skepticism. But we saw that in its non-autonomous forms, if not carefully balanced, it could potentially limit individual agency or creativity if deference becomes blind.
Okay, that distinction is key. What else?
Secondly, those slippery slope risks, they aren't just theoretical worries. They highlight real, profound vulnerabilities.
And conceptualist frameworks are more prone.
Definitely seem to be, yes. More prone to drifting into that radical subjectivity or towards general non-autonomy, precisely because their realities are so fluid, so easily reshaped by human will or external pressure. Realist autonomy, especially ordered autonomy, seems far more stable, more robust because of that external anchor.
Got it. Third point.
That rhetorical overlap we spent time on, it's more than just confusing language.
You called it insidious.
I think it can be. It blurs the lines, makes it incredibly difficult to tell the difference between genuine, objective reality and cleverly disguised human constructs.
And this particularly affects.
It makes frameworks like traditionalist autonomy and conceptualist non-autonomy highly vulnerable to misinterpretation, to problematic shifts, perhaps without anyone even realizing what's happening. It fundamentally challenges clear thought and honest debate.
A huge problem. Okay, final takeaway.
Finally, just grasping those individual state dynamics, it tells a powerful story about agency. The autonomy frameworks fundamentally grant greater individual agency, more choice, more participation.
While non-autonomy.
Non-autonomy frameworks progressively increase state dominance over the individual, culminating in that complete submissiveness, that externally defined reality we see in general non-autonomy. Where you stand on this spectrum says a lot about your view of individual freedom versus external control.
It really is a lot to unpack. But understanding these frameworks, it gives you a powerful lens, doesn't it? For analyzing political systems, social movements, maybe even just your own personal beliefs with far greater clarity.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing the underlying assumptions about truth, about reality, that are silently shaping your entire world, whether you realize it or not.
It really does. This deep dive has certainly underscored for me just how profoundly these conceptual choices determine how we operate in the world, whether we see ourselves constructing reality or participating in it.
And that's all the time we have for this deep dive. As you go about your day, maybe consider this. In what ways do you feel you create your reality, and in what ways do you strive to discover a reality that's already there? Thanks for joining us.
We'll catch you next time.